Jason Turner, Iron Detective.
Okay, let's start with a short film. Take care of that. Very interesting. Chapter 2 and then Chapter 1.
Supposed to be reversed.
A little mixed up. So,
Programming error.
but what's going on with this thing? The different chapters of the Iron Detective. What are you working on here?
Essentially, I like the idea of a serialized kind of story and a character that travels through it. You kind of look at James Bond. James Bond has many adventures, and I'm a big fan of Blade Runner, and I'm also a fan of noir, much like this film that we just saw. I like, men that are in trouble and they have dangerous women they get involved with, and it's just kind of a story that pulls from that. And I have so many stories. I've built a huge world, and I'm just taking little snippets of the world and telling stories within it.
Will there be more Iron Detectives then?
Yeah, actually, we are currently working on a new chapter, and that one is going to take place in his younger police days when the Solid Soldier program was first activated. It's kind of like RoboCop meets Iron Man kind of thing, but halfway through the program, there's a terrible accident, and the funding gets pulled. So he has all these incredible gifts, and he's a wandering futuristic knight, but he has no master. He has nobody they can serve, so he just kind of has to do freelance work. And so that's why he's alone and drunk a lot of the times. So.
Does anyone have any questions about Iron Detective?
How did you decide to go from the animation to the live?
Originally, Sentinel was supposed to be a live-action short, and I had written it with a certain friend of mine in mind. She, some of the real drama in her life was actually kind of the basis for some of that, but she wasn't available to do the story, and the more I tried to pull it off, I just realized it was just too impossible to do as a live-action short. So I wanted to have a physical manifestation of that world and that story. So I commissioned a comic book artist named Philip Stadler in Germany to do the artwork, and he had a real sense of that Sin City kind of Frank Miller-esque vibe. And I said, let's do it as a comic book. And since I own the character and I own the rights to the story and everything, I talked to an animator friend of mine, and I said, hey, what if we started moving some pictures around and maybe we could turn this into kind of like a motion comic kind of animation? And he said, yeah, sure. So he completed about 50% of the work, and then he moved to Los Angeles, and I was with half of a movie, so I suddenly had to take a crash course in learning keyframing and motion animation. And a lot of that stuff was done in Adobe Premiere, and I had access to all the Photoshop files, so I cut things out and do blur effects to kind of get like that rack focus thing. But obviously it was just too expensive. I couldn't build a cybernetic arm at the time. I didn't have access to a helicopter or a futuristic club or anything like that. And I didn't have access to an actual nightclub singer. I knew some singers, but they were all just too busy. So it was just easier to do it as a book, and I wanted to hand that to producers. Unfortunately, whenever I hand it to producers, they're just like, well, this is like a $60 million film. I'm just like, oh, all right, you got $60 million? That'd be great. But unfortunately, nobody does, because I'm not, Tom Cruise or Johnny Depp. I'm just Jason Turner at this time. So I did a lot of my own, and once that was completed, we started working on a live action short, because I actually had this helmet for a long time, and I carried it around and I showed it to people. I said, hey, I want to make a movie with this. And people were like, yeah, that sounds great. And then when they realized the world that I was trying to create, some people would fall off of the wayside, and understandably, because it's very, science fiction on no budget is really, really. So going from a comic book, I can hand that to somebody and say, this is the world. And if they're just like, oh, what are you gonna do with that? Then I basically have kind of like a moving animatic in a way,